Hello, historians. Welcome back. All right, today we are going to be talking about more causes of the Civil War. So this was a very tumultuous time in the United States history. There's a lot of stuff going on at this time, and the states were realizing that they had very different opinions about what they felt like should be happening. So remember last time we talked a bit about the economics. So remember, economics is money. Money's always a big thing, always very important. So remember the northern states? They had the factories, right? So to make money, those factories could produce items. And because the North had all the factories, the North could produce items at a quicker rate than the South, right? Could produce at a quicker rate. So they could make stuff faster because they had more factories. Now, the South, and remember the North had paid labor. The South, on the other hand, remember the South had the big plantations. Remember, a plantation is a big farm. I'm talking big. Like these were hundreds of acres, very big. So, ooh, that's so blurry. I don't know why it's so blurry. Oof. They had the big plantations. So they were able to grow their own crops and livestock. Now, the North had farms, but they weren't near as big as the plantation. Crops and livestock. And remember, those plantations depended on slaves. They depended on slave labor to grow the plants and crops and produce the livestock. Okay, so beginning in the 1800s, the early 1800s, states started getting these different ideas and kind of formulating their opinions. So the government was working to try to avoid a civil war. They saw this brewing. They saw that the North and the South were kind of bickering, and they saw this fight brewing. So they were trying to kind of make both the North and the South happy, so that there would not be the Civil War. Which, remember, Civil War is a fight within a country. They did not want that to happen. So one of the things that our government came up with was something called the Missouri Compromise. Remember, a compromise is when you don't really get what you want, but both sides give a little bit so that everybody feels okay about it. Okay, this would be like if you were talking with your family and somebody wanted pizza and somebody wanted mac and cheese and someone wanted sandwiches and nobody could agree on what you wanted. So you made a compromise and said, okay, well, we can get pizza tonight if tomorrow we can go out and get tacos or whatever. Okay, so the Missouri Compromise, this was when states were becoming part of the Union. So at this time, Missouri and Maine wanted to become states. And when a state became a state, it was decided at the beginning if the state would be able to allow to have slaves or not. So the Missouri Compromise stated that when Missouri became a state, it would be a slave state, and Maine would remain a free state, or Maine would become a free state. Now, this also said that in the future, as states would become states, any state that was above the 36-degree 30 line would be a free state. And if you were below that line, you would be a slave state. So at this point, these were the states in the United States, the ones that are colored in, the ones that are not colored in were not states yet. People were moving there, so they were to become states. But this said anything below that green line, those states would be it would be okay to have slaves in. Anything above that line would be free states. So you can see the free states are in blue, the slave states are in red. Okay, scoot that back out of the way. Okay, so that was the Missouri Compromise. All right, so a little bit later on, we had the Compromise of 1850. So another compromise. So states were still kind of bickering about whether they wanted to be free or state as they joined. And this said that instead of using that line, that states would vote on whether they would be slave or free. So the Compromise of 1850 just tried to further ensure that there was no fighting as new states were coming into the Union. And again, it just allowed a vote of whether the state wanted to be free or slave. Okay, so those were some compromises coming in. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some other things that were going on at this time. Okay, so one of those things, and this one, I know some of you have heard this word before because we've talked about it, the Underground Railroad. It's a neat thing. Underground Railroad is always something I've been fascinated with too. When I grew up in Pennsylvania, the older houses, and I'm talking old, remember this is like 1850, 1860, so older houses, many of the older houses were a part of the Underground Railroad. Now, the Underground Railroad was not a real train. It's not a real railroad in what you think of as a railroad. This was a way for slaves. It was a group of people who would help slaves escape north. So this was abolitionists. Abolitionists, there we go. Who helped slaves escape north. So I grew up in Pennsylvania, and where I grew up, we were on Lake Erie, which was right across the water from Canada. So once a slave got to Canada, they could not be brought back to their owner. They could not be forced back to slavery again. So we would have houses up there, and these were older houses, like early 1800s, and they would have hidden rooms underneath the stairs and false walls and places like in the basements where you could hide people. And they were stops on the Underground Railroad. So houses were marked, and it may just be like they would leave a candle in the window, or people just knew where to go. But those houses were safe places for slaves trying to escape to the north. And once they got to Canada, they were really they were free. They couldn't be brought back. So I always thought it was neat. I always loved going into these houses and seeing like the false walls and just learning the history of how they were stops on the Underground Railroad. Now, one really famous woman that we have to give credit to for the Underground Railroad is a woman named Harriet Tubman. She is really neat. So Harriet Tubman was, she was an abolitionist. Before she was an abolitionist, she was a slave. She was born into slavery. And she escaped. And then she put herself in danger to go back to the South and help people who were enslaved to escape. So she worked with the group of people, the network of people, to help more and more slaves escape to freedom. So really neat lady. Okay, something else that we're going to talk more about next time is a book that was written, and I bet you're thinking, a book? Why is that important? This book changed many people's views about slavery. It became really important, and again, we're going to talk more about it next time. So the book's name was Uncle Tom's Cabin, and Uncle Tom's Cabin was written by a woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe. Harriet Beecher Stowe. And in this book, it was it was a story about so Uncle Tom's Cabin was about a slave named Uncle Tom, and he saved a little girl, and the story told went into the truth about the cruelties of slavery. And this book was actually, it was banned in the South. So we hear sometimes about books being banned nowadays. This book was banned in the South because it was an anti-slavery book, and it had a profound effect on changing people's opinions about slavery. So it helped lay the groundwork for the Civil War, because people, more people's eyes were open to how horrible slavery was, and more people opposed it after reading the book. Okay, next we're going to talk about John Brown's raids, and we're going to see more about this tomorrow too. John Brown's raid. So John Brown was an abolitionist, and he got a group. He was an abolitionist. He got a group of slaves together and armed them, so he gave them guns and munitions. And he led them in a revolt at Harper's Ferry. Now, they were defeated. Revolt at Harper's Ferry. But this is sometimes called like the opening act of the Civil War. So this is one of those things that once this happened, this was like the beginning, right before the Civil War happened. Okay, so during this time, last thing we're going to talk about today, during this time, we had as president Abraham Lincoln. And I would not have wanted his job at this time with everybody being so divided. He was our 16th president. And he was very anti-slavery. He was against slavery. And because he was against slavery, the Southerners did not like him. Okay? And he was our president during the Civil War. Okay. One of the reasons the Southerners finally decided to go to war with the North was because they disagreed with the president. They did not like the president. Okay, great job, friends. See you next time.